Watching this show was like watching my preschooler eat a banana. The Mandalorian Season 3 is certainly one of the Star Wars shows on Disney+. That's probably not the highest praise I'll give it during this review, but it's close. Let's dive in and break down the various story elements that made this show what it was. A big old bunch of flashing lights with no real vision behind it, a plot that was somehow both rushed and drawn out, and a serious lack of character work. Starting with the plot, I'll break it down real quick. Din Djarin needs to be redeemed since he took his helmet off in front of Grogu, so he goes with Grogu to Mandalore and gets captured by a something. Grogu escapes and goes to get Bo-Katan, who comes to rescue Din from the something, allowing him to then attempt to drown himself in the swimming pool of redemption, requiring yet another rescue from Bo. Since Din, not Bo, has the Darksaber, the other Mandalorians won't follow her, and thus they can't retake Mandalore. So, Bo returns with Din to his covert and hangs out with them until the armorer decides it's time to retake Mandalore. Din and Bo then go to see Bo's former crew, and he reveals that she is the rightful owner of the Darksaber by transitive properties. Something I called in my episode 2 review, by the way. Also, shouldn't the Darksaber belong to Bo-Katan now? I'd say that whatever this thing is pretty clearly bested Mando, and Bo-Katan undoubtedly beat it in combat, so by transitive properties, I think she should get the Darksaber now. So now the other Mandalorians will follow her. The two groups join forces and land on Mandalore and discovered that Moff Gideon has built a secret base there and has been mining Beskar to equip himself and his troops. After a few action sequences, Gideon is killed and his base is destroyed. Oh, and Gideon was cloning himself and giving his clones the Force, but that doesn't really come into play. So what worked and what didn't in this plot? Let's start off with the good. The show does hint at the Imperial base on Mandalore in Episode 3 when the TIE interceptors show up seemingly out of nowhere on Concordia. How all that Imperial activity went unnoticed by the few Mandalorians who were still living in close proximity to the Forge is beyond me, but whatever. At least the show had the decency to set up that surprise reveal. The idea of a small-scale war between the Imperials and the Mandalorians hell-bent on retaking their home planet is intriguing, but the execution is poor. For one thing, Gideon is not even reintroduced as this season's villain until Episode 7. So for 6 of the 8 episodes, there was no central conflict. The retaking of Mandalore was in everyone's heads throughout the season, but there's never a compelling reason given as to why they want to retake Mandalore. Sure, it's their homeworld, but for all they know, it's a toxic wasteland. And even when they find out it's not toxic, it's still a wasteland. They don't know about the ore that Gideon found, nor about the sanctuaries discovered by the Mandalorians who survived the Purge. Din, Bo, and the rest have no real incentive to retake Mandalore. The show just needs them to go there because that's where they put the bad guy. And that's one of the central problems with this story. It's largely just and then storytelling. Things happen because the script dictates they happen. Bo-Katan rescues Din from the mines, and then the Imperials show up and bomb her home. Why? She was peacefully living there, clueless of Gideon's base, even after her visit to the planet's surface. But the story needed to get Bo and the Armorer together, so they could talk, and then the Armorer could decide it's time to accept that some Mandalorians take their helmets off, so they should all work together to retake Mandalore. In Episode 1, the pirates get pissed off by Navarro becoming a nice town, and then they leave it alone until the 5th episode when they suddenly show back up and decide now it's time to make trouble, because we needed a reason to get the Mandalorians back on Navarro so we could introduce Mecha Grogu. Din gets separated from the rest of the group, and then Bo-Katan bangs on the door helplessly. Only after he's taken away does she remember she has the Darksaber and uses it to cut through the door that was trapping them. The sense of cause and effect throughout the whole show just isn't strong, and that makes the show lack tension. The conflict in the final episode isn't built up to at all. The Mandalorians literally stumble upon the Imperial base and get thrust into battle. That would be fine if it happened earlier in the story, if instead we had an initial skirmish that helped build tension and set up a larger conflict. The show wasn't building to this final battle at all, it just happened all of a sudden. We could have had the entire group of Mandalorians on Mandalore by Episode 3, have them explore the planet, set up a base, and slowly discover signs that they're not alone there. They could encounter Imperial patrols, scout the Imperial base, and make a plan of attack to destroy or capture it. The show could have given us Gideon's perspective, showing his escape, his plotting, letting tension build as we anticipate the clash between his forces and the Mandalorians. Instead, there simply was no such buildup of tension. The Mandalorians just happened to suddenly find his lair, and then a battle breaks out. And that serves to highlight possibly the worst part of the show, its pacing. Here's how at least half the episodes went. Brief opening scene that is relevant to the overall plot, followed by the vast majority of the episode being some random quest or conflict, followed by a short ending scene that is again relevant to the plot, such as it is, but in no way tied into the middle section of the episode. This made the plot feel rushed, like we were just taking big bites out of it in very short amounts of time, but also feel drawn out, since it took a long episode to actually get to those bits. It's like when my toddler eats a banana. He'll hold it idly playing with it or babbling to himself for seemingly forever, really drawing out the process of eating the stupid fruit. And then when he finally decides to eat some, he shoves far more than he can chew in his mouth. So I'm sitting there thinking, hurry up and get to it already. And then moments later, no wait, not that fast. That's how watching this show felt. The worst offender was episode 6, in which Bo and Din are headed to convince her former crew to join them. You know, to move the plot forward, and then Bo has her ship's control wrested from her by the script, by the town's air traffic control system, and they are forced into an inane, contrived side quest whose main selling point is the celebrity cameos. Din and Bo are told about the town's droid problem and how the other Mandalorians can't help out because the town doesn't allow for standing armies, but Bo and Din can help them because they're Mandalorians and thus weapons are part of their religion. I'll let you work out the plot hole on that one for yourself. Our heroes eventually investigate their way into a droid bar where one batch of droid whiskey has been infected with malware that conveniently tells them upon investigation what it does, where it came from, and who purchased it, letting them wrap up the mystery in short order and spend about the last 12 seconds of the episode advancing the overall plot. You see what I mean about the toddler and the banana? The show just has no sense of proper pacing. It can't figure out how to connect its A and B plots, so it just doesn't even try, making for an unpleasantly disjointed viewing experience that ultimately leads to the final conflict being completely underdeveloped and emotionally unfulfilling. So let's switch gears and talk about the show's character work. There is none. Din's character growth through season 2 gets completely undone. He's just there in this season, ostensibly teaching Grogu how to be a Mandalorian, but since Grogu is a puppet with 3 facial expressions rather than an actual character, it's not exactly a dynamic relationship. We could have had Din explore what life was like as an exile from his covert, but that would require actually writing a character arc and having Pedro Pascal be physically present for the show, so there went that idea. The only character who did get some mild, and I'm being generous, character development was Bo-Katan. After she witnessed the living mythosaur and was redeemed and accepted into Din's covert, I thought we were going to get some exploration of the Mandalorian religion, or at least the sect that created Din's group, and we would dive into what it's like to live inside this isolating community where the members never even see each other's faces. But really, the only taste we got of that was this scene where Bo looks around forlornly after the others leave her so they can all eat dinner. And then the armorer declares that the Mandalorians can walk 2 ways, so Bo-Katan can take her helmet off, and the show escapes having to do any real character work. Of course, the protagonists aren't the only ones who need their characters fleshed out. Any good story needs a great villain, and Giancarlo Esposito's Moff Gideon has proven to be a formidable foe in the past, so naturally he is completely absent from this show until the penultimate episode. And his plan isn't even revealed until he hilariously tells Din about his plot to create an army of force-wielding clones of himself after Din has already destroyed said clones. I couldn't stop laughing when he gave that monologue. Villains explaining their plans in great detail to our heroes is one of the most common tropes in film, but I have never seen it done after that plot was already ruined by the hero, who just so happened to stumble across the key to said plan. Gideon complained like a Scooby-Doo villain who would have gotten away with it if it weren't for that meddling Mando. Seriously, who wrote this monologue and thought it was a good idea? Well, I guess whoever wrote the rest of the script. The dialogue in this show is just so incredibly bland and unimaginative. It makes it clear that the writers do not trust the audience to actually be watching the show. They expect us to be scrolling through Reddit on our phones and needing to get pulled back into the story periodically by a character telling us what is happening, what just happened, or what will happen. Like Bo-Katan exclaiming, "They bombed my home!" after the Imperials bomb her home. Dr. Pershing murmuring, "Biscuits," after we are shown a crate full of biscuits that he talked about earlier. Paz Vizsla repeating that they can't attack the pterodactyl or it will kill the foundling, which turns out to be false anyway. Carson Teva's partner telling the audience what Teva is thinking when he sees a scrap of Beskar, and so on and so forth. It's just characters stating what is happening, what they're thinking, what they want. There's absolutely no nuance to any of the dialogue. And that's part of the reason why the pacing is so bad. The writers could not come up with ways to make the actual plot points take a reasonable amount of time because they could only write dialogue that cuts straight to the point because every character in this show is a one-dimensional poster board. Whatever, I hear you say. Who cares? I'm just here for the action. The action is good, right? No. It sucks. Let's start in the opening episode where the Mandalorians decide that the best way to fight this giant crocodile is to stand within reach of its tails and claws rather than just flying away and using their ranged weapons to wear it down. What exactly were they expecting to achieve by latching onto it with their wrist cables? How was that going to accomplish anything than getting yourself yanked off your feet? Are these members of this warrior religion actually just terrible fighters? Do they in fact suck at their jobs? Let's hold that thought. In episode 2, Bo-Katan spies a nest of monsters and knocks them out of the ceiling, and then just lowers her weapons and refuses to fire until one of them starts rushing her, because the script wanted her to get into hand-to-hand combat, despite the fact that she could have easily just dispatched the monsters by shooting at them while they were lying stunned on the ground. Episode 3 at least had a reasonably solid in-atmosphere dogfight. As per usual, it required the bad guys to miss a lot, but at least Bo was flying through tight turns and dodging around cliffs, not just going in a straight line. It was somewhat creative and inventive, as well as visually pleasing, but unfortunately that's about as good as the show's action gets. Going back to our point after episode 1, if the Mandalorians do actually suck at fighting, let their battle against the pirates in episode 5 remove all doubt. They do. They do suck at it. They're terrible at this. These expert pugilists are going up against a bunch of drunk pirates, and they manage to get boxed in on a city street, despite the fact that they have jetpacks. Have you ever heard of the high ground? I get that Sun Tzu didn't exist in your galaxy, but Obi-Wan did, so you'd think that maybe, just maybe, these people who apparently fight for a living would use their jetpacks to take to the easily accessible rooftops and rain fire down upon their hapless enemies whose cover is now rendered irrelevant. Literally, the only time you see a Mandalorian use his jetpack in this scene is to land on the ground. How about you land on a rooftop 10 feet up like a warrior with an actual brain would? Instead, we get minigun ex machina, because if you have a big gun and stand out in the open, nothing can harm you. Piss off, show. Oh, now you use your jetpack in a 1v1 where no one's likely to die anyway. The fight between Bo and what's-his-name, Axe Woves, is a serviceable duel, but it carries no weight because A, this guy isn't a character that we know about, care about, love, or hate. He just exists. And B, the entire fight is rendered moot because Din finally remembers that Bo is the real owner of the Darksaber because transitive properties, remember? Gee, if only he'd remembered that earlier, we could have skipped so much filler. Thanks for nothing, Din. But the episode 7 action is good, right? I mean, Mandalorians versus Beskar-wearing Imperials has got to be sweet, right? First off, hold your horses. Let's start with the Mandalorian skiff getting destroyed because they spy this humongous monster from a long way off and then continue sailing toward it. What exactly was their plan here? Could they not have turned or stopped? Again, this is and then storytelling. The Mandalorians see a giant monster, and then it smashes their skiff. If there was an ounce of logic injected into the scene, that would read, the Mandalorians see a giant monster, therefore, they stop and send a small scouting party. Alright, now we'll get to the actual firefight. Once again, the Mandos just cower behind cover and shoot at their enemies. The only one to use his jetpack is the guy who escapes through the ceiling to warn the others. Just, can you have the Mandalorians do something? Can they be slightly creative? Can they coordinate and maneuver using their jetpacks? No, they're just gonna squat there and hope they don't get hit until Paz Vizsla decides it's time to start shooting his minigun, which once again wins the day because of course it does. And I don't even know why they bother taking cover. Din and Bo are allowed to bum rush Beskar-wearing foes because their Beskar is better than the Imperials, I guess. So they chase the Imperials down the hallway until they discover it's a trap. Din is separated from the rest of the group with 3 other Mandalorians who die quickly because this is Din's scene, and the rest of the group has to watch helplessly while he gets captured. Bo-Katan bangs impotently on the door with her blaster, completely forgetting that she is in possession of a weapon that can cut through solid metal. That is, until Din is taken away, and the Mandalorians want to escape back the way they came. And here we get our final rendition of Minigun Ex Machina, as Paz Vizsla proves that as long as he has ammo, he is invincible. His Beskar beats your Beskar. Don't ask why, just gape and wonder. Then, when he runs out of ammo, he wins by brute strength because why not? And then, when the Praetorian Guards show up, he uses his rockets to... Oh, no, he just goes hand to hand against enemies with energy weapons. Dude, I can literally see the rockets in your jetpack. They're right there. Use them. Oh, well, I guess he's dead. Okay, one more episode, and the last episode is basically just one fight scene after the other. First, Din escapes because the idiotic Imperials don't think to take off his helmet and armor and only leave 2 stormtroopers with this bounty hunter who famously dropped 4 of them at the beginning of the show. Mecha Grogu shows up out of nowhere to save Din because, of course he does. How did Grogu get there? Not a clue. He's here, don't question it. But surprise! Moff Gideon is tracking them. He leaves to take care of them, and then he disappears for many minutes, so Din can play through a video game level where the enemies are sent at him 2 by 2, thanks to R5, who you forgot existed in this show. As per usual in Disney Star Wars, the enemies only act when the protagonist is good and ready, like this trooper who just stands there with an easy shot at Mando so Din can throw a knife into his throat. Or this trooper who just waits for Mando to ram into him, and then his buddy who jumps 6 feet into the air after Mando stubs his toe. After completing that level, Din is allowed to access the story part of the mission, in which he destroys Moff Gideon's clones, which are a thing, I guess. You would think that Gideon had headed down here to stop Mando from destroying his clones, but nah, he was just waiting outside his control room. You know, the room he was in when he was tracking Din and Grogu, and from where he headed out to stop them. It certainly seems as if he had plenty of time to get down to the clone bank and fight Mando there, but whatever. Anyhow, Gideon kicks the crap out of Din until the Praetorian Guards show up because, hey, remember them from The Last Jedi? And these guys absolutely wreck poor Mando, and just when one of them is jamming his vibro-spear in between Din's shoulder and back plates with a direct line to his spine and/or heart, Mecha Grogu shows up and all 3 of the guards go after him. 2 more seconds and you had Din dead. You have absolutely no reason to leave him alive. What is going on here? Oh well, back to the 1v1 now, which includes just the most hilarious missed punch I've ever seen. Watch it again. And again. Okay, last time. Okay, one more time. Was that really the best take of that punch you had? Couldn't you have shot that again and made it look less ridiculous? So, Bo-Katan shows up and she duels Gideon while Mando goes back to help out Grogu, who decides it's finally time to use the Force to gently knock over the Praetorians, which, whatever. The duel between Bo and Gideon is fine, I guess. It's rendered completely irrelevant by the fact that the entire base gets destroyed by the crashing Mandalorian ship, which miraculously had its navigation systems still intact, despite being relentlessly bombed and strafed by every ship Gideon had. Oh, and there's a jetpack fight that is also a meaningless spectacle, which only serves to show us that yes, the Mandalorians do in fact have rockets that could have come in handy in previous battles. And that's it. That's the show. They all die down there. Okay, fine, maybe they don't. But yeah, that really is the end after Mando decides it's really time to get back to Season 1 and just hunt some bounties. This show, like most Star Wars properties, had so much potential, but it refused to give the plot a meaningful conflict. It dodged any potential character growth and had writing that can only be described as simplistic. It wasted the audience's time with constant B-plots that had nothing to do with the main story, which itself was severely underdeveloped. The lack of tension building made the finale fall flat. This season should have spent time building Gideon's plots along with the plans of the Mandalorians, slowly bringing them together in a manner that would build tension and gradually drive the conflict to a dramatic final battle. If your big finale happens because your heroes stumbled into your villains, you haven't earned the spectacle that follows. Well, that's it for my thoughts on this show. Let me know what you thought of it, if you watched it. What are you going to watch to cleanse your palate of this nonsense? What other shows should I review? And don't worry, I've started Rings of Power, and I have some thoughts. And as always, thank you for watching.